Halloween 1999. 217 passengers board Egypt Air Flight 990, setting out from Los Angeles and stopping in New York City before reaching the final destination in Cairo, Egypt. After the plane took off from New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport, it quickly crashed into the Atlantic Ocean nearly 60 miles from Massachusetts. Everyone on board was killed instantly. Because the plane went down in international waters and because the airline belonged to Egypt, it was their government that investigated the crash. However, seeing as though they did not have the resources to investigate, the National Transportation Safety Board and the FBI were called in. Their findings proved to be underwhelming, as the FBI stated they believed the first officer of the plane meant to commit suicide and kill everyone else on board. In the flight recordings, the pilot can be heard exiting the cockpit to use the bathroom. The first officer is heard repeatedly muttering the phrase, "I rely on God," before locking the engines. The pilot returns and attempts to correct the plane but fails in doing so. There are many who doubt the first officer was merely suicidal. Many believe he was a jihadist terrorist. Despite that belief, no terrorist organization claimed responsibility for the crash, so there remains an uproar in the aviation community what the real cause for the crash was. August 14, 2005. The Helios Airways Flight 522 from Cyprus to Greece ends in a devastating tragedy. There are multiple theories as to why the plane went down in the mountains, and numerous investigations seem to put some small pieces of the puzzle together. But the chain of events that took place either show a conspiracy to incapacitate everyone on board before the crash, or an extreme case of negligence to the plane's passengers. Investigations show that before takeoff, mistakes were made in checking the pressure of the cabin. Even after the plane took off, multiple warnings were given to the pilots that the cabin was not pressurized adequately for the passengers, but all warnings were ignored. Finally, after climbing to an altitude of nearly 20,000 feet, all the passengers on board fell unconscious. Soon the pilots drifted into unconsciousness as well, and the plane was set to autopilot. After multiple attempts to get the crew to respond, ground control set up 2 jets to fly alongside the plane and investigate. There they noted that everyone on board was unconscious, and the pilots were slumped over at the controls. A flight attendant on board who managed to stay conscious after using a personal oxygen tank attempted to fly the plane to safety, but his training was limited, and the plane crashed into the Greek mountains. All 121 people on board were killed. Now conflicting reports say that it's possible the passengers died while they were in the air, rather than in the crash, and the mystery continues. The story of D.B. Cooper has enthralled aviation experts for years, as his story doesn't necessarily end in tragedy, but only because no one is quite sure how it ended at all. The story in question begins on November 24, 1971. A man who claimed his name was Dan Cooper boarded Flight 305. After the flight took off, Dan Cooper notified the nearest flight attendant that he was armed with a bomb. He notified the attendant that he wanted $200,000, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck on standby in Seattle so he could quickly refuel his plane. The flight attendant alerted the pilot, who alerted ground control, and authorities quickly scrambled to make Cooper's demands. Passengers did not become aware of the hijacking until hours later. Cooper instructed the pilot to land the plane on a private tarmac, released all of the passengers, received his money from the authorities, and kept a small flight crew on board. After taking off one last time, Cooper instructed that they would fly to Mexico City. However, after the plane spent some time in the air, he instructed all of the flight crew to lock themselves in the cockpit. As they did, Cooper released the aft door and, presumably with the money in hand, skydived out of the plane to an undisclosed location. Cooper was never seen or identified ever again, despite decade-long investigations. His name was even changed in the media to D.B. Cooper due to a miscommunication. The FBI believes Dan Cooper was an alias to begin with anyway. Multiple suspects have come forward, claiming that they are in fact Dan Cooper, including a transgender woman named Barbara Dayton, who claims she was in fact Dan Cooper and was also an experienced pilot and parachuter. She died in 2002, having recanted her story when she feared that she could still be prosecuted for the hijacking. While this doesn't pertain to any specific instance of a downed plane, the mystery surrounding flights aptly titled Flight 191 is so pervasive, it has kept multiple airlines from even having flights with that number. Since the early 1960s, there have been a total of 5 horrific crashes and bizarre instances involving Flight 191 planes. From the tragic crash of American Airlines Flight 191 that took the lives of nearly 300 people, to the near disaster of JetBlue Airways Flight 191 that involved the pilot of that plane hearing voices, ranting about multiple conspiracy theories, refusing to fly to the plane's destination, and screaming at ground control before he was removed from the cockpit and subdued by passengers. He was subsequently placed in a mental hospital after the plane landed safely. Still, the number 191 has been enthralling to a number of numerologists and even psychics, who call the number one of Satan's favorites and implore airlines to stop using the number, as it attracts evil spirits. One of the oddest plane crashes in history lends itself to the mystery of the Aer Lingus Flight 712 crash of 1968. While investigators have never been able to pinpoint just what caused the crash, they were able to designate that it was likely spurred on by damage it received to its left tail wing. While the popular reasoning within investigative units is that a stray bird managed to damage the wing enough to cause the plane to freefall, killing all 61 people on board, a theory also suggests that a small British missile was what took out the plane. Various witnesses claim to have seen a missile fly through the air and strike the plane, detonating and causing a large hole to appear at the tail. While the investigative units responsible for figuring out just what happened deny that to be the case, along with the British government who says it would never fire a missile at a passenger jet, they have not ruled out the possibility that a missile could be responsible for the downing of the plane. A broken arrow nuclear bomb is essentially what it sounds like. A nuclear bomb that has no chance, or a very limited chance, of detonating. Still, you wouldn't want to leave one around or misplace one, which is almost exactly what happened in 1956, when an airplane carrying 2 nuclear warheads vanished into thin air over the Mediterranean Sea. The bombs, situated on a B-47 Stratojet, were obviously cause for alarm as the United States scrambled to see if they were live nukes or broken arrows. They quickly deduced that the plane was delivering 2 broken arrow nukes from a checkpoint, and that despite the fact that no one should be losing nuclear weapons, no one was in any real danger, unless the nukes could be reverse engineered by a dangerous crockpot. To this day, the B-47 plane carrying the nukes was never discovered, nor was any wreckage ever reported. As if the story wasn't shocking enough, the United States has actually lost up to 11 nuclear warheads during its entire history, which proves that maybe being the world's superpower doesn't necessarily mean you always know what you're doing.